The Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at cem.mtsu.edu.
This is supposed to be for new ESL teachers or new teachers just in general or new to ESL. So I know some of you, I've talked to a couple of you, they're already teaching and you're just moving into ESL. Is there any like brand new teachers? Like, yeah? Okay, good. Okay, good. That helps me out to kind of know what I need to cover and what I don't. Okay, so this is just an hour-long session. Obviously, I mean, if we had all day, we couldn't cover everything you're going to want to know as you start your new job. But I'll try to kind of hit the high points. My goal is for you to at least have confidence whenever a teacher or an administrator asks you about something to do with ESL. At the very least, that you know what they're talking about, even if you don't know the answer yet. But I put my email up here because I want you to email me if you have any questions, because like I said, there's just no way, and I'm absolutely happy to help you out in any way I can. It's mullinsc@rcschools.net. Oh, by the way, I'm Corey Mullins. I need to tell you a little bit, I guess you want to know who I am. I've been working with English language learners for about 12 years now, and just ESL has been just a topic of interest for me for a long time. I love teaching it. I love learning about it. For the past 5 years, I've worked at Smyrna Elementary School here in Rutherford County, and we have the largest population of English language learners in the county, or by percentage. So we have 8 full-time ESL teachers. We've got 4 EAs, ESL EAs that work with our kids and assist us and also translate for us. As you can imagine, we need a lot of translation at our school. And so we're a pretty big team. And then this year, I'm actually transitioning to a new position. I'm going to be an ESL instructional coach through Title I. So I'll be training teachers and stuff like that. So you guys are kind of helping me get started on my new job here. But I love the camaraderie of teaching. I love working with teachers. So really and truly, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'd be happy to help. Okay, so we'll start off. We're going to make just a couple of basic kind of distinctions about ESL in the school, because whenever I talk to new teachers, I find that there's sometimes some misconceptions about how ESL fits in terms of how it fits into the school system. Some of you may have had a background teaching like EFL. Sometimes I'll meet people which is English as a foreign language, if you're not familiar with that term. Maybe you've taught in China or something like that. ESL in the public school system is a little bit different. So first of all, you need to know that ESL is Tier 1 instruction. So what that means is it is not an intervention. Okay, so you think about kids that maybe they are struggling with reading, so they go to, through RTI, they may go to an interventionist. That's not what ESL is. ESL, whether we're talking about a classroom teacher working with English language learners or someone who is an ESL specialist who's pulling ESL students into small groups, either way, you're doing Tier 1 instruction. What that means is you're working on or working towards working on that core content that the state has said, this is what we want every 3rd grader to learn, or this is what we want every 5th grader to learn. Now, I say working on or working toward because, of course, your students are going to have gaps, right? They may not learn the things they were supposed to learn in the previous grades, either because they didn't have enough language to learn that, to understand the instruction, or because maybe it was in another country in a different language and they just haven't transferred that knowledge over yet, or sometimes they just miss those grades altogether. I mean, we get that all the time in ESL. We'll get kids, first day of 3rd grade is their first day of school, right? So for whatever reason, there's going to be gaps. And if those gaps contain some essential knowledge that they have to know in order to move on, to progress to the next level, you're going to have to go back and teach that. But here's the hard reality of our situation as ESL teachers. You can never press pause on a student, right? If you have a second grade English language learner, at the end of that year, they're going on to third grade. And the next year, they're going on to fourth. Regardless of whether they went to kindergarten and first, right? I mean, the state doesn't go, oh, well, you missed kindergarten first, you can camp out in second grade for 3 years. It's just not going to happen. They're going to get moved. So we have two things that we've got to kind of balance out. On the one hand, we're trying to fill in those gaps of all that instruction they missed, and on the other hand, we've got to get them ready for that next grade. And you're never going to strike that balance perfectly. I mean, in ESL, to some degree, you're always robbing Peter to pay Paul, right? Because whenever I focus on one thing, then I'm neglecting a little bit the other. So you're going to get really good at in this job at homing in on the core content. You got to really ask yourself every time before you teach anything, is this essential? Do they have to know this? What content is going to give them the most bang for their buck? So there's a lot of things that are fun to teach. There's a lot of things that be interesting and be good for the kids, but you're going to have to really be kind of greedy with your time and say, but is that essential? Is that really something that they're going to use year after year after year? And do they really need to have that in order to progress? Those are the things we want to focus on. Okay, and the next thing you need to understand is that ESL is not a subject. Again, this is one of those differences between ESL and EFL, or just any foreign language, like a foreign language you would take in middle school or high school. ESL in the public, at least in terms of the public school system, is more of an approach to teaching. We have similarities to a foreign language class in that we use a language acquisition model, right? We provide listening and speaking and reading and writing practice for those students in hopes of accelerating their language acquisition, but this is the language of instruction. So what we're not doing is we're not really focusing on the language as an end unto itself, but as a means to teach the primary function, academic vocabulary, content vocabulary. So that means what we're working on with an ESL program is teaching the language of mathematics, teaching the language of science, teaching the language of social studies, teaching the language of English language arts. All the academic content, that's what we're working on. As far as social language goes, now social language is kind of one of our standards, but that's not really the one you're going to need to focus on the most because they're going to get that on the playground, right? You guys, I know probably know the difference between BICS and CALP, right? That basic interpersonal communicative skills versus that cognitive academic language proficiency. Those are two different things. They're going to get the BICS from their friends. They're going to get it from watching TV. They're going to get that stuff just from being in an immersion environment, that conversational English. But what they're not going to get is photosynthesis. Right? They're going to have to get that from you. So that's the function of an ESL program in the public schools, teaching that academic vocabulary, that core content. And our goal is increased comprehension in the classroom. That's absolutely it. If you want to know what am I doing with this little person, where am I wanting to take them, this is it. We want them to be able to take advantage of the instruction they're getting in their regular classroom. We want them to be able to more fully participate in classroom instruction. If they don't know what the teacher's saying or they don't understand the lesson, they're not going to be able to get much out of that instruction. So that's our goal. So all that to say, ESL supports classroom instruction. This is really important because we don't ever want to be like, Lone Rangers. We're just teaching whatever we feel like. That's not doing our kids any favors. If you're in, like, for example, in a school system that uses a pull-out model where you pull the kids for an hour, you don't want to do something that hour that they're not doing all day long in the rest of their classroom. How are you helping them? Right? They're just going to be sitting there confused all day, and then they come to you and they're doing something totally different. That's not the best way to function in terms of an ESL program. By the way, I don't think I asked this before. How many of us are going to be like classroom teachers working with ELLs versus a ESL specialist like pulling kids? So are you just going to be in a class? So if you're going to be just in a regular gen ed classroom?
I'm going from RTI, taught interventionist position with small groups to back into the general ed classroom with I think it's 2 ELLs.
Okay, so you've gotten your ESL certification and you're expecting to get English language learners put into your classroom, right?
I don't have an ESL certification.
Oh, okay, so your school pulls kids, but you're going to be working with ESL kids. Is that right?
They're going to be in my home room, and I'll have them in class.
Okay. All right, so I may have made an assumption. How many in here have their ESL certification? Okay, see, know your audience, right? I made a few assumptions. Okay, so a minute ago I said Bix and Calp. Okay, so if you didn't follow that, students are going to learn in conversational language before they learn academic language. The time it takes to become conversational in English is usually anywhere from 1 to 3 years, whereas the time where it takes to become proficient in academic language, even in an immersion environment in the school system, is about 7. Okay, so that's the difference we're talking about. So that's why I'm saying that if you're an ESL teacher specifically, you focus on that. If you are a classroom teacher, you're still going to focus on that, but you're going to hone in on those core words. And I'll come back to that in just a minute and kind of revisit that for those of you that are just regular classroom teachers. So the number one job of an ESL teacher, or I'll add a classroom teacher with English language learners, is building up academic vocabulary. That's it. There's other things that we do. We can help them with a lot of things, but this is essential. All right, so I'll go over some basic terms. First of all, our first term is WIDA, and hopefully you've probably heard a lot about that in the last couple of days at the 10 TESOL conference. This is just our standards that we use. WIDA is the organization that makes the standards that we use in Tennessee and many other states, as well as our testing materials. The home language survey, if you're a new teacher or you're new to ESL, may be one that you've not heard about. So we are required by federal law to make sure that we're servicing English language learners. And so the way we do that, we identify them, is through a survey called the Home Language Survey. It's very simple. It's just 3 questions. What's the student's first language? What's the language they most often speak at home? And what other languages are spoken in the home? Those are the 3. And what we'll do with those, usually we'll put them in a registration packet at the beginning of school. They'll send it, the teacher will send it home, and then if you have a specific ESL department or ESL teacher at your school, it'll go into their box, and usually they'll sort through. And if they answer anything other than English on one of those 3 questions, those kids have to be tested. So if you're going to be the person in charge of collecting that paperwork at the beginning of the year, you'll need to know this. So it's sometimes just called the HLS, the Home Language Survey. Now, kind of a cautionary note with this. In some communities or just with some people, there's a fear of being stigmatized if you're labeled an English language learner or an immigrant. They're afraid that maybe their child, parent will be afraid their child is going to be maybe taken and put into a different classroom, or they won't get to go to the same classes like the specials and stuff. And so sometimes people will fudge on this, and you'll have an entire registration packet in Spanish, and then we'll get to the HLS and they'll say English, 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 right? Or sometimes comically Inglés, 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 right? All right. So what we do in that situation, this is how I've handled that in the past, and it comes up every year. I mean, it happens every year, is if it looks like this student is speaking another language other than English in the home, I'll go ahead and pull them, I'll test them, and then what I'm going to do, if they don't qualify, fine, but if they qualify for services, I'm going to call mom and dad at home. And if I don't speak the language that they speak, I'll use a translator, if at all possible. Now, this is not always possible, but if at all possible, I'm going to contact mom and dad, and I'm just going to explain to them what ESL is. I'll say, look, they're not going to be put into a different classroom. They're going to have their same teacher. They're going to go to all the same things that their friends do. They're not going to go to a different PE class or art class or anything like that. All this is we're going to give them extra support in learning English so that they'll learn English faster and they'll get even better grades. And usually once the parents explain that, 99 times out of 100, they say, oh, okay. And they'll go ahead and send home the form, they sign it and return it. Occasionally, you'll have somebody that's just adamant, no, I don't want any special treatment whatsoever. And if that's the case, then that is the parent's right to waiver services. Parents can waiver pretty much any service they want. So if they do that, you'll just send them, your district will probably have some kind of form that says, I waiver the services or something, and you'll send that home. But you need to let the parents know that even if they waiver those services, by law, we still have to test their kids in the spring to test their language acquisition, to test their growth and proficiency. And so sometimes I've had it happen like this, where they refuse services, and then at the end of that year, when we get back our scores, and they have not grown, they're still a level 1 after a year in school, I'll call mom back and I'll say, look, according to this, your student didn't learn much English at all. So I don't think she got much out of her instruction in kindergarten or first grade or whatever. Are you sure you don't want to reconsider getting support? And sometimes they'll say, okay, yeah, you know. So I always try to revisit this. It is the parent's right, but I just want them to make an informed decision. So I wouldn't just let it go without at least trying. Of course, you know, I don't ever try to badger the parents or anything like that. So I just want them to make an informed decision. Okay, so there's the WIDA screener. If you are an ESL teacher, specifically in your school, you will be giving the WIDA screener to any student who brings home the home language survey that says something other than English. And it just determines whether or not a student is eligible for services. Oh, one other thing about the home language survey, sometimes schools get this wrong. Not every student has to fill one of these out. It's only new students. So if they're a returning student, if they're already in your school system, that's just a waste of time and paperwork. You know, if you got 800 kids in your school and you go through 800 of those, that's a waste. Just the kids that are new to the system. So if you have like a school secretary or something that's just putting them in every registration packet, you might want to let them know, hey, this is just wasting our time. We don't have to do this. Because I see that a lot at a lot of schools. Okay, so the Access is the other thing that WIDA produces. It's our test that we take in the spring, and it measures growth and proficiency. And they're going to get 4 scores. They're going to get the listening, the speaking, the reading, and writing score. Okay, and then they're going to get a combined listening and reading score, which is what they call the comprehension score. And then they're going to get a combined reading and writing score, which is a literacy score. And then they'll get a composite score, which is all of them together. In order to exit the program on a scale of 1 to 6, and I'll show you what those are in just a second, the levels in WIDA, they need to get at least a level 5 in both the comprehension, in the literacy and the composite. Get a level 5 in the literacy and the composite, they'll exit the ESL program. And that's on Access, correct.
You said it's a 5 in which one?
Yeah, you have to get a 5 in composite and a 5 in literacy. So if you're an ESL teacher and you're put in charge at the beginning of the year of sorting through the Access data and determining which kids are going to be in the program or not in the program, that'll be a key information you'll need to know.
Those scores haven't changed, right?
They have not.
Okay, I thought I'd heard that they had changed.
Okay, so last year they were going to lift the cut score, and well, I'll give you an example. Okay, so normally my school will exit around 50 to 60 kids in a year. I think when they put out the new cut scores, we had like 2 exit. And they realized immediately, the state realized, oh, wait, we made a mistake here. This is not. And so they went back to the old standards. There was like a crazy, like administrators calling the state saying, I'm going to have to hire 4 new ESL teachers because we got new kids coming in and none leaving, So I don't think that's going to change. I haven't heard if they've gone back to that anyway. Okay. And then the new thing this year is the ILP. This is brand new for everybody in the state. It's the individual learning plan. And all this is going to be is it's going to have their Access scores. It'll be kind of a summary of what that means in terms of what the students can do in the classroom. And it'll have a kind of a list of accommodations and modifications that the ESL teacher will put together in coordination with the classroom teacher. So this is going to be, we're not really sure how this is going to go. It's a brand new thing. It's going to require some extra paperwork. It's going to require some extra coordination between the ESL teacher and the classroom teacher. It's going to take a bit of time. You should be working with your classroom teacher anyway. Like I said, when I said the number 1 job of a ESL teacher is academic vocabulary, one of the best ways we can do this is by front-loading key academic vocabulary that they're going to be receiving in their classroom before they see it in their regular lesson, if that makes sense. So, for example, if a classroom teacher has a big unit coming up with lots of complex vocabulary, if they'll let the ESL teacher know ahead of time, they can then take that, introduce it beforehand. Not only that, not only you kind of slow it down and kind of give kids more time to process and digest it, you can also find where those gaps in the knowledge are of prior knowledge that's necessary to understand the new concept and kind of get those kids ready to go ahead and receive the instruction. And you talk about building confidence with ESL kids. I mean, if you have an ESL student who's used to not understanding, and then you give them the keys to understand so that they can answer questions about new material in the class in front of their peers, they're so proud of themselves. So that's going to require coordination between the classroom teacher and the ESL teacher. And that's not always easy, because you guys know that have already been teaching. Once it gets going, I mean, you always feel like you're this far behind and you're trying to catch up, and everybody's busy. But the more we can coordinate between the ESL teacher and the regular classroom teacher, the better it'll be for our kids. All right, any questions about anything I've said so far? Yeah.
Okay. I'm a little bit confused on what you do with the access scores versus the WIDA screener. Like, okay, if they score well on the access test, like the end of the year, and then do they get screened for WIDA?
No. Okay, good question. Okay, so the screener is just for new students. So this is a student that's coming into the system. Let's say they just moved here from Guatemala. We have no data on them other than that home language survey. So the screener is kind of like a little miniature access. It's just much shorter. And all it's going to do is determine, does this student need services or not? And it'll give them kind of a rough equivalent to the access score. It'll kind of give you a ballpark figure of where they're at. Are they low? They don't have any language? Are they kind of intermediate? Are they high? It'll give you kind of a ballpark figure so you know what kind of classes to place them in. Once they're there for a school year, in spring they take access, then the access score will take the place of the screener score. And from that point on, every year that access score will be what's used to determine what kind of class they go into or whether or not they exit the program.
So they don't take the screener ananymore once they do it the first time?
No, the screener is just the first time. So that'll be kindergartners, of course, and then kids, and then new students that are coming into the system that have never been in the system. Okay. Any other questions? I know this is kind of like drinking from a fire hydrant, but if you think of another question after you go back, if you look at your notes and go, I have no idea what this was, just again email me. Okay, so let's talk about the levels of language proficiency. Okay, so in WIDA they give 6 levels, and they call them entering, emerging, developing, expanding, bridging, and reaching. And so I've put up here this is not from WIDA, but I just put up the rough equivalent because most textbooks and things like that don't use these terms, but they're roughly analogous to beginner, early intermediate, intermediate, advanced, and basic fluency. And they don't have one for fully fluent. They don't have a score for that. And then I've also put kind of a ballpark figure of what you can expect their vocabulary levels to be. So if they're brand new, if they're entering at level 1, they're going to probably have a vocabulary of less than 500 words. These are kids that are brand new to the country, or they've just arrived a few months ago. Then from there, it'll go up, and every student's different, but you could roughly equate this to 1 year of instruction in the school system. On average, from what I've found, kids will move through in about 4 years. So there'll be a level 1, then a level 2, then a level 3, then a level 4. When you get to level 5, of course, then you can exit the program. Now, that's not all kids, of course. Some kids will rocket through it. They'll get through it in half the time, and some kids will take twice as long. It just depends on the student. But as a general rule, that's what you could expect. So for most kids, if they're in a level 4, they're probably in their last year of ESL. Now, if you want to know how this compares to native English speakers, that level 4 right there is the first day of kindergarten for a native English speaker in terms of how much vocabulary they know. Now, so if you have a 5th grader that's a level 4, that doesn't mean he has the same skill set as a kindergartner, right? He may be a math whiz, he may have great decoding skills, he may have a whole lot going for him. But in terms of how much vocabulary he actually knows and understands, first day of kindergarten. And so how that can help you in terms of your instruction, so let's say I'm teaching a science lesson, and I've chosen an article, maybe off ReadWorks or something like that, on that subject to support that science lesson. And I know I have a level 4 student in there, a level 3 student. I'm going to read through that article and think to myself, if I read this to a kindergartner, right, what words would probably be confusing to them? Or what would just go over their head? And right there, I know my vocabulary that I need to pre-teach in order to give that student success in that article. So that's why I'm showing you this, just to kind of get a ballpark of where they're at. And of course, level 4 is high, right? You'll have level 1s and 2s and 3s. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second, about how we can reach, how kind of level 1 kids, how we can engage them and stuff. If you want to know in terms of how this compares to the population at large, so like I said, most people age of 5, native English speakers, about 5,000 word vocabulary. By age 8, 10,000. By age 13, 20,000. And then the average adult native English speaker has a vocabulary of around 30,000 words. Give or take a few thousand based on things like, language, education level and things like that. So that's a rough estimate. So you can see that even when they're ready, even if they hit at level 5, they got an 8,000 word vocabulary, they're still, if they're older kids particularly, there's still going to be a pretty large gap. Okay, so that doesn't mean when they exit, they're not still ESL. They're still going to need some support. They're still going to be at a somewhat of a disadvantage. And it may never fully close. Most second language speakers of English have a vocabulary 10 to 15,000 less than native speakers. Even, I'm talking about advanced fluency. Even people that reach advanced fluency, they never usually fully close that gap. And that doesn't mean they can't be successful or they can't go on to college or anything like that. It just means that there's always going to be a little bit of a disadvantage for them. They're going to have to work around that. They may have other skills that balance that out. And of course, hard work can balance out anything. But it's going to be a struggle, always. So just to give you an idea, in 2016, of all the English language learners in the United States that graduated, not all of them, but all the ones that graduated, only 1.4% took a college entrance exam. So this is serious stuff, right? I always want to bring it back to the fact that what we're doing when we're working with our English language learners can really impact their life long term. And we do a pretty good job in Tennessee. Our graduation rate is 73% for English language learners. I mean, that's not perfect, obviously, but it's about 10 points higher than the national average. We're in the top 10 states. And in Arizona, they have 18% graduation rate for it. So 4 out of 5 English language learners in Arizona won't graduate from high school. So this is really important stuff. Yeah, it is sad. And so I bring that up because, there's going to be days, like we're all human, where you just want to mail it in, you just want to, give them some busy work. You don't want to give your best teaching. And I think about stuff like that, and I think, no, I can't do that, because these kids are depending on me to help them learn these words that are going to give them success. That's another way that ESL is different from a foreign language. A lot of people take a foreign language in middle or high school, don't really learn that much. They still do great in school, right? You can't do that if the language you're learning is the language of instruction. You cannot have academic success if you don't attain fluency. That's just the bottom line. So that's what we're working toward. Okay, here are the class levels. So if you're responsible for placing kids in different classes, there's not a mandated way you have to group them, but this is a very common way. So if they're level 1 or newcomers, they'll typically get a 90-minute block of instructions solely focused on academic vocabulary and building up and filling in those gaps. If they get to like a level 2 or level 3, low intermediate, they usually go to a 60-minute small group, something like that. Now this could be a small group in a classroom, it could be a push-in group, it could be pull-out. Every school system has a different model they use. Different schools in different school systems sometimes use different models. And then when they get to a level 4, again, that's probably kids that are in their last year of the program. They're high intermediate, they just need a little extra support. They'll get a 30-minute class. Now, not all schools do the 30-minute class. This is typically in schools that have a really large ELL population, and there's just not enough time or manpower to give everybody a 60-minute class. So if you're in a school that's like this, what I would recommend to do with those level 4s in a 30-minute group is just focus on getting them ready for access. Focus on them showing what they know. So like on access, they have to answer certain kinds of essay questions, for example, and they have to answer certain kinds of oral language questions where they speak into a microphone. I would just make sure that they know the format of those essays. You know, if they're expected to write a compare and contrast essay, that's not, and they've never written one before, you're not necessarily just measuring language, right? You're measuring, do you know how to do this task? So with that level 4, they're ready to exit. If they can just show what they know, that's what I'd focus on to get the most, because you can't really do a lot with 30 minutes, right? That's a pretty quick time of instruction. And then of course, when they get to, if they score a 5 or a 6, they'll exit the program. All right, I know it's a lot of stuff. Just an example here. So this will be like a level 1 question. Sun, A, B, or C. And then this next one will be maybe like a 1.2, 1.3. How many people are in the park? And then this, I took this out of a practice book, so you have to imagine there was a picture next to it, right? They're not expecting them to just be like clairvoyant or something.
So do they have to read the question?
Yes, they do.
Okay, so you don't do anything?
There's no read aloud because that would what's the word?
Skew?
I heard somebody say it. Invalidate, thank you. Yeah, skew. It would skew, yeah. It would invalidate the results because I can't test their reading if I'm reading it aloud for them. Yeah, and then this would be a level 6. So according to the passage, what makes the Mayas similar to the Aztecs and the Incas? You can see this, at this point, we're basically native English speaker level, right? This is level 6 is fluency. So it's got words like civilization and unsuitable, inhabited, lush. So when they get to this level, if they can perform a level 6, they don't really need that extra support anymore. I know there's a lot of information. Any questions, comments, concerns? All right, yeah.
This is a biggie, okay. How do you go about finding your resources?
Okay.
There's not a book.
Right, okay, so every district is different in terms of what you're provided with. And some places provide you with very little. So, so there's first of all, online is a great place to just start, right? And I wouldn't say there's any one website where I'm like, oh yeah, that's it. I'll show you a website in a minute for that you can use with newcomers. But more than anything, I would use things like, I would start with what we're doing in the classroom. Okay. And then I would go and look for resources that parallel that, or I'll make my own. So for example, let's say that they're doing a science lesson on the planets. Just say you're teaching 5th grade ESL and they've got to know the planets. You can find all kinds of stuff on the planets, but it may not be at your student's level. So what you're going to do is take that information, what you can find, like a ReadWorks article, something like that, and then you're going to modify it to make it appropriate for those students. So when I modify a text, the things that I can do is I can simplify the grammar. Remember, like what I talked about before about read it like imagine if you were reading it to a kindergartner, okay? If you got a 5th grader, they're a 3 or a 4, I'm going to read it, and if there's a sentence construction that's very complex, very confusing, I'm going to simplify that. Again, I'm not changing the content. This is important to understand. The content's still going to be the planets, right? I'm still teaching them the exact same words they're going to learn in class, the exact same information, but I'm simplifying the language. So you're going to spend a lot of time when you're lesson planning modifying existing things because there's no one-stop shop for ESL. I wish there was. But the truth is, every ESL teacher you talk to, you'll say, what do you spend the most time on? It's modifying stuff. It's making it appropriate. We take a lot of curriculum and things and make it appropriate for our English language learners. That doesn't mean there isn't stuff out there, but the problem with a lot of the stuff that's made specifically for English language learners is it's really expensive. And unless your school's got a big budget and they're willing to spend that stuff, I mean, I can't spend $700 on a curriculum for my kids. I don't have, I can't buy $1,000 worth of workbooks. So a lot of it you're just going to have to make yourself, if that makes sense.
What are some of your favorite websites and resources? Okay,
so we'll get to visuals in a minute, but for visuals, I just use Google. I'll Google it, go to image search, open the one I like, copy click, paste, and either goes into my PowerPoint or it goes in a Word document. I print it out, I can laminate it, use that. Some of the, for things like games and activities, the Florida Center for Reading Research has a lot of games and activities that you can use for ELA things, if you're doing ELA. For things like science, there's tons of articles on places like ReadWorks, things like that. You may have to, again, modify them, or sometimes you can find lower levels. Reading A to Z, if your school subscribes to that, it will have a lot of content, words, content vocabulary. I'm trying to think right off the top of my head. News ELA. Sometimes those are pretty hard. You'll have to do a lot of modifying, but they have good social studies topics. And then even things like Weekly Reader or things like that. But more than anything else, this may not be the answer you want to hear, but more than anything else, I make my own. Most of the time, I've probably spent thousands of hours over the years just making my own articles, making my own, kind of designing it myself based on those content standards. But I go, okay, I've got a classroom of level 2 English language learners in 3rd grade. I look at the 3rd grade standards, I look at what their teaching is, and then I just make it. I just take the time and make it. Of course, the good thing is, your first year or two, you're going to put a lot of extra hours in. But anybody that's been a teacher can tell you, any first job, you're going to put a lot of hours in. Some of that stuff you'll be able to reuse, and so over time you'll kind of get a bank of things that you can. So it takes a little bit of the time off of there, but you're going to make a lot of your own stuff.
So are you constantly talking with your learners, teachers, about what they're learning or what's coming up?
Yeah, that's really essential. Now, I can and you can and often do end up teaching something after it's been taught in the classroom, just because we didn't get to it, more like a review, and that's okay. That's not bad. It's just if you can front load it, I think it's more beneficial. But as long as you're covering it, as long as you're covering that core content. And again, you're going to have to make judgments about where that student's at. If you had a newcomer, you're going to be really basic stuff, especially those first few months. There's no choice. They don't speak any English at all, right? And then you'll kind of build up. But yeah, does that answer your question? I'll try to include some more resources too, and just to say, I think I may have some of them.
You said that was Florida Center for Reading Research?
Yeah, you can just Google FCRR, and that'll come up. Again, a lot of and that's for ELA stuff. If you're teaching about
they have
nouns
really good fluency stuff.
And then another really good one is National Geographic.
Okay.
My in my residency, 4th and 5th graders loved it, and they do modify the text, so they start with like Pioneer. Right. It's like the same content, but like the Pioneer is like 2 or 3 sentences, and then the Trailblazer is like paragraphs.
Oh.
So I'd be, yeah.
Do you have to subscribe to that?
Well, our school had a subscription, and then there's like the website you can get on the website for free and do the quizzes on there and print the text and stuff, and that's free.
I've used News ELA for my master's program I'm doing now, and I love it. They have the leveled.
Something else I just thought of too is there's a website, and it's free. It's called Rewordify. And what that does is you can take a text, as long as it's in a cut and copy form, and they have basically just a box. You enter it in, and you click the button, and it's simplified. It'll go through and it'll identify what's the hardest vocabulary, and it'll give you alternatives. And you can print it out. You can do word banks and quizzes. So I've known ESL teachers that use that. I find that because it's a program. It doesn't think like so it's not perfect, but you can use that as a starting point if you're kind of thinking, okay, how can I modify this to make it appropriate? You can start with that and then kind of move things around according to your own judgment, but it'll simplify the language of like complex sentences into more simple sentences, high-level academic vocabulary into synonyms that are a little easier to understand, things like that. Let's talk about newcomers, because this is what I get more than anything else from both new classroom teachers or new ESL teachers, is like, you get this person that just got here yesterday from wherever they came from, they don't speak a word of English, like what do I do with them? Like how do I even communicate with this person? So I want to give you some kind of quick tips on things you can do. Before we do that, one of the best techniques is that you can use for comprehension checks with a newcomer is called circling. Okay, so let's do do you guys know the 5-finger comprehension check? You know that one? Okay, let's do this one right here. So you put your hand, you can use this with your kids. You put your hand over your heart, like this, just like you say in the pledge, okay? And then you're going to rate your knowledge on a scale of 1 to 5. This will help you know, like, oh, do they already know this? Did they not know this? And usually you'll have kids all facing you. So I'll just, I'll say, oh, don't worry about what anybody else is doing. You have to do it too. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing, okay? Just show me. And so what you'll do is if level 1, so for example, with circling, if you've never heard of it, you'll give me a 1. If you've heard of it, but you're not really sure what it is, you'll give me a 2. If you've heard of it, you know what it is, but you don't know the steps, you'll give me a 3. If you know the steps, but you don't feel confident enough to teach with it, give me a 4. And if you're ready to rock and roll, you could use it in your own classroom, give me a 5. So 1, no idea. 2, a little bit of an idea, but not really. 3, know it, but can't use it. 4, know the steps, but not confident. 5, I'm ready. Okay, all right, good. All right, so circling is a language technique that we use, especially with newcomers, as a way to check their comprehension without confusing them. So it starts with a yes/no. It starts with receptive language. So like a yes, you're giving them a yes/no question. And then it's going to move on to a little more complex receptive language. You're giving them choices, an either/or type question. Then it's going to move on to like a one-word or a short phrase answer, which is a specific response. That's when we get to productive language. And then you go through the whole cycle again. So I'll kind of model that in just a second. But the reason this works, to just kind of give you an idea of what the thinking is behind it, whenever you're learning a new language, you learn your receptive language first. That's the language that you hear and understand. You're going to learn that more quickly than you learn the productive language, which is where you actually pull it out of your mind, right? So to give an example, like I speak Spanish at a very basic level, right? I need a lot of help. I'm not that great at it. So I can be in a conversation where I'm speaking with someone and they'll say something to me. I completely understand the sentence. I know what every word means, right? And I can respond. I can be in a conversation with that same person the next day where I need to now use that sentence structure or that vocabulary and be at a complete loss, because that is a more challenging linguistic activity to be able to pull it up from memory. So I can recognize the word when I hear it, but I can't remember it to use it. Or I can recognize the sentence structure when I hear it, but I can't actually formulate it yet. And so this kind of does that in miniature. In like a single lesson, you kind of walk them through that from receptive to productive. So I'll get somebody to be my volunteer here, to be my newcomer. Anybody want to volunteer? All right, what's your name?
Catherine.
Catherine, okay. All right, Catherine, so I'm going to set up a scenario. This is my visual. Again, visuals don't have to be anything complicated. It can just be a picture. I'm teaching a science lesson on food chain. And we've gone through the basics of the food chain and learning about producers and consumers and how producers get their energy from the sun and consumers get their energy from the producers. And now we're moving into those specific relationships that take place within the food chain. So we're learning about predator and prey. I'm just setting up the scenario for you. Okay, and so what I've done is I've provided visuals. We've had my wolf is my predator. Maybe I had a antelope or a deer or something as prey, or rabbit, right? We maybe did some hand gestures. So maybe our hand gesture for predator is this, and maybe for prey it's that. You make it fun. You get all the kids to do it. Maybe I showed them a video of a pack of wolves chasing a deer through the forest. Oh man, the kids love video clips, right? And they're like, anything I can do to give them context, okay? And then Catherine, she's a newcomer. She's been here for 3 weeks, okay? I want to see if Catherine is picking up on this vocabulary we're teaching. So I'm going to start with the simplest one. It's a yes or no. That's usually the first 2 words you learn in a language, right? I mean, if you don't speak a word of Spanish, you probably know sí, right? Even if you've never had a Spanish class. So it'll go like this. Catherine, the wolf is a predator? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. All right, and notice I said the wolf is a predator, like that. I said it in statement form and I made it a question just using the inflection. That's intentional because the first few weeks of working with a newcomer, sometimes even the first few months, we tend to just take in language in chunks and repeat it sort of parrot style. We don't have a sense of word order yet. And so what I want to do is I want to keep it in statement form, because what will happen is if you're constantly using the question form, and by question form I mean when you change the order of words, not like question words, but the order of words, they'll start repeating that as statements. They'll start saying, is this a desk? Is this a chair? But they're trying to say statements. So, and then that's something else you got to fix. So you can avoid that problem just by starting out in the early days by just using statements and then using inflection to make them questions. And then after a few weeks of that, as they grow in their confidence and their understanding of the language, you can kind of gradually transition into correct question form. Okay, but I start with yes or no. Yes or no. This is a predator, yes or no? She said yes. That tells me she knows she's not confused, right? She got it. So I'm going to move on to the next stage. And this is still like a multiple choice, receptive language. I'm going to give her a choice. I'm going to give her the choice of predator, or I'm going to give her the choice of prey. So she's got to be able to say it, but she's just got to be able to receive it, right? Just remember what it is. So to go like this, Catherine, the wolf is a predator or the wolf is prey?
Predator.
Very good. Yes, the wolf is a predator. I'm repeating it. I'm reinforcing it. Okay. Once I've got that, then I can move on to the specific response. She's already answered 2 receptive questions. She's got predator locked in now, right? She's probably going to be able to remember it. Hopefully, right? And so then once we've gone through that, then I'm going to go to the specific response. I'm going to see, can she say the word predator? So I'll say, Catherine, what kind of animal is the wolf?
Predator.
Very good. The wolf is a predator. Okay? Just like that. Now, if comprehension breaks down at any point in this pattern, all I got to do is go back, clarify whatever it is I need to clarify, reteach whatever I need to reteach, and then I go back through the circle. And so it's really simple. It's really simple, but it does take a little practice to where it becomes like second nature to you. But newcomers need to be engaged, and they need comprehension checks, and just like any other student. If you don't use it, right? If you don't do anything with them, they're just going to sit there zoned out.
So do you go through that whole circle in like one right after the other?
Yeah. So now after that, then I'm going to do it with the prey. I'm going to get my visual for prey, and I'm going to go through that one, right? or whatever it is I'm teaching. Yeah. And I can come back as necessary. You can do this multiple days. You can stretch it out. Over time, your questions will become more complex. But this is a way, especially with newcomers, if you want to engage them right away, you don't want to wait till they've been here 6 months before you can ask them a question, right? You want to start engaging them as soon as possible. Get them involved in your classroom. This is the way you're going to do it. Oh, I forgot. I just put this in here. If you really want to get really good, and I'm not associated with this school. They don't pay me to tell you this, but MTSU has a summer language institute called the Center for Accelerated Language Acquisition, CALA. Okay. And what they do is they'll have classes on different foreign languages where they use these techniques, things like circling, TPR, TPRS, that's total physical response, or total physical response storytelling, visuals, realia. And basically, if you just want to see some master language teachers, I mean, it is fantastic. And in June, what they do is they have an actual session for teachers. And so what you'll do is you'll come in the morning, you'll sign up for Chinese or French or Spanish or whatever it is. You'll go from like 8 to 12, and actually you get to be the newcomer. You have to sign up for a language that you don't know anything, right? That's their rule, okay? You got to sign up for something you don't know a thing. You're the newcomer. You get to be the newcomer all morning. See what it feels like. And you're going to start learning words. And you'll be like, wow, I'm learning these words. And then in the afternoon, they'll have the teachers come in and they'll have an afternoon session from like 1 to 3 where they break down, this is what we did, this is why we did it, this is how it works, this is how you use it. I mean, so I did this a few years ago. I filled a notebook with notes. And I'm telling you, you will probably learn more in a week of watching those great language teachers than you learn in your whole ESL certification program. And that's the truth, because the best way to learn something is just to really watch somebody that's good at it. So again, that's just a free plug for Kayla, but I highly recommend that. And you might think, I don't want to give up a week of my summer, but it's fun. Like when it was over, I was disappointed. I was like, man, I wish we could do this for like the rest of the summer. It's that fun.
What other languages do they offer?
I know Chinese, French, Spanish, Latin. I know those 4. I'm not sure. They may have more. That's from what I remember. It's been a few years since I've done it, but I know I looked up on their website to see if they still have this, and they do. They've already done the teacher training. They do it in June, but there's always next year if you want to try that out.
You know the website?
You can just Google Kayla MTSU, and it'll come up. It's talking about programs or resources. Here's another one that a lot of people don't know about. It's BrainPop ESL. Probably most of you, if you've taught in school, know about BrainPop or BrainPop Junior. If you've worked with younger kids where they have, content-related videos. You may have seen the BrainPop ESL little icon on there when you go there, but it's not the same thing. It's not just videos for ESL students. Okay, it is actually a course for newcomers. It's a 90 lesson course. It starts from not knowing anything all the way up to ready to learn academic vocabulary, and it's just a phenomenal. Program. You do have to have a separate subscription. So just because your school subscribes to BrainPop doesn't mean they'll have this. But if you have newcomers at your school and you don't have this, you might want to talk to your Title I person or your administrator and just see, can we get this? Because it's just a great resource. So that's a resource that you can use. Now, it's not a replacement teacher, obviously. You still have to, but it can be something that, because they'll have a video where they introduce the words, then they'll have a video with the vocabularies that they home in on specifically. They'll have a video on the grammar. And then they'll have activities where they practice, and there's even a quiz at the end. They have games and stuff. Kids love it. The kids love it. It's a lot of fun. Trying to just hit the high points. Okay, all right. Should I use translators with my newcomers? I get this question all the time. So we all know that immersion is the quickest way to learn a language. And so a lot of times I'll have teachers come to me, regular teachers, ESL teachers, and they'll say, hey, if I'm letting somebody translate for this newcomer, like one of my other students, Am I hindering their progress? Am I somehow maybe doing away with some of the immersion aspect of what they're doing? And the answer is no. You absolutely have nothing to worry about. It's actually the opposite. If a new student has a translation available to them, they'll actually acquire the language more quickly. And there's been lots of studies to back this up. So being in an immersion environment doesn't mean you don't get any help. I mean, if that were the case, why would we even have ESL programs, right? Why would we have ESL teachers? You'd just be like, here you go, kids, sink or swim. Immersion just means you're surrounded by native speakers of the language you're learning, and you have plenty of opportunity to practice. Lots of practice opportunities all day long. That's an immersion environment. Doesn't mean you don't have help. When they've studied, when they've taken two groups of students and they put them in an immersion environment, and they give one translators and one they don't have translation, the students with translation learn much more quickly the language. So that's one thing. The other thing I often get is, how long should I let them use a translator? Because some people are afraid that it'll become a crutch. It'll be an excuse for lazy thinking. Like instead of trying to formulate the sentence, they'll just get their friend to translate it for them. But I really don't think you need to be concerned about that, because the student themselves will actually disengage from the translator whenever they're ready for it. I've seen it happen again and again. Because if you think about it, translation is a really inefficient means of communication. If you've ever had to communicate with somebody via translator, you say something to them and then they say something to that person, and they say something back to that person, they say something back to you. I mean, it's exhausting. Anybody would much rather communicate directly with their conversation partner than to have to go through an intermediary, right? So the kids will actually wean themselves off the translator as soon as they're able to. I know, same thing, like I said, I know a little bit of Spanish. I can kind of speak at a basic level. And so if I have somebody come up and start translating, like, ¿Cómo estás? I'm like, hey, I don't need your help with that, right? I got this. I don't want translation if I don't need it. And you'll see that with the kids. Like some kid that's been translating for them for the first 6 months because they needed it, all of a sudden one day they'll start to translate something for them. They'll go, I know that. Like, you just disrespected me. Like, it's funny. They don't want a translation if they don't have to use it. So absolutely let them use translators if that's available. It's not always available. Sometimes, if you get a kid that speaks Spanish or something like that, there's a good chance that there's going to be somebody else there that can translate for them if you don't know the language. If you get a kid that speaks Farsi or something, they may be on their own. They may be the only kid in school that speaks that language. But it's definitely not a hindrance, so you don't have to worry about that. All right, remember the number one need of newcomers, all students really, but especially those kids that have just gotten there, is just a relationship with you. You think about it, you're in a brand new country, you don't understand anything, you don't know anybody, and you're a kid. I mean, it's very intimidating. You can imagine as an adult how you would feel, much less when you're just a little kid. And so just making them feel welcome, making them feel like a valued part of your classroom will go a long way to helping them. Because if they're stressed, if you've studied crashing at all, that means, the affective filter goes up, right? And all the affective filter is your brain going into survival mode. And when your brain goes into survival mode, you can't learn new language. Because you're just surviving, right? You're not thinking long term. You're not thinking, I need to know that word so I can use it tomorrow. You're just surviving. So just by loving a kid, making them feel welcome, you can actually, in a measurable way, accelerate their language acquisition. And it doesn't matter if you don't have a single word in common because, there's body language, tone of voice, facial expression, all that stuff communicates just as much as words do. And they'll know if you value them and you welcome them. So that's what I have to say about newcomers. We could spend all day just on that one subject. I'm just trying to kind of hit the things that I think are most important to think about as you start your year. All right, this is the number one problem, without a doubt in my mind, in the classroom is engagement of English language learners. You can go in any classroom, in any county, any state, all over the country, and you'll walk in and you'll see an English language learner looking like this, just staring off into space. And I think what happens is the teacher, sometimes they just don't know what to do. Like they've had no training on working with English language learners, so they feel a little inadequate. But also, they know the student has a low-level language acquisition, and so they don't want to embarrass them or put them on the spot. They think, they're probably not going to know the answer, so they just don't call on them. And they think they're doing them a favor, but they're not. I mean, you think about it. If you don't understand the lesson and you're not being engaged whatsoever, what are you going to do? You're going to zone out, right? I mean, any one of us would do the same thing. So you end up having these kids that are just zoned out all day long, and maybe they go to ESL for an hour and they get interaction in that 1 hour, but the rest of the day they're just zombies. That's not going to work you're not going to get them where they need to go by doing that. So we need to make sure we're using engagement strategies. So I'm just going to go over some of I think the ones that are the most important. I already talked about circling. This is just kind of an extension of that idea. You should have levels to your questions. So I'll just give a few examples of how you could work through a level. These are by no means an exhaustive list. There's, of course, thousands of different ways you could ask a question. But whenever I'm asking questions in my class, I don't want just this general question where I ask the whole class. I mean, those are fine, but I don't want that to be the only thing I use. I want to be thinking about, this student's a level 1 over here. They've been here 6 months. This student's a level 2. They're in their second year here, etc. I want to tailor some questions for different language levels in my classroom to make sure I'm including all of my students, because any student, like I said, even newcomers, can be engaged. You don't have to wait till they're fluent to start asking them questions, right? And so at the very most basic, you could do nonverbal response questions. Point to the fish. And you can model it. Point to the fish. Maybe you're doing sea creatures, right? You got a jellyfish, an octopus, a fish. That's a perfect question for that person that's on their 3rd day here. Point to the fish. Point to the fish. That's vocabulary, right? Then you can move on, of course, like I said, yes or no questions. Those are receptive vocabulary, either or questions. Do fish live in water or land, right? And then to short response questions, where do fish live? That's the productive, right? Water, they live in the water. Or then you get to extended response questions. How do fish find food, etc. Okay? And then, of course, from here, then you can just jump onto Bloom's taxonomy, right? You can do analyzing questions, evaluating. You can change it up however you want. But you want to make sure you have a wide variety of questions for a variety of language levels if you have a variety of language levels in your classroom. All right, so that's one way that you can, just by changing your questioning techniques, you can engage your students. And I mean, again, this isn't rocket scientist. I mean, I know some of you may be thinking, yeah, of course, but you'd be surprised how many teachers don't do this. They just ask general questions to the classroom, and they got 3 kids that answer all the questions, they're 3 high kids, and all their English language learners are just sitting there like that. Just don't do that to your kids. They need to be engaged at whatever level they're on. All right, I'm going to give you, I think I got one more here. Okay, partner teaching. This is my absolute favorite strategy. I think this is probably the most powerful strategy for engaging English language learners in your classroom. It's also called peer tutoring. If you're not doing this in a regular classroom, you need to. Even in an ESL classroom, you can do this, even if you have all ESL students. So what it is, you're going to take your proficient students and you're going to pair them up with your non-proficient students to teach a concept. Here's why this works. The research shows that second language learners learn more language from their peers than they learn from teachers. I mean, by a wide margin. It's something like 70-30. So we can take advantage of that fact. It's just a natural fact of, you learn from those you socialize with. Their friends are just more interesting to you. You're not going to be able to compete with that. So what you're going to do is you're going to use that in your classroom to help them learn new vocabulary, new concepts. So I'll take a proficient student with a non-proficient. It can be a native English speaker with an English language learner, or it can be in an ESL classroom, maybe a student that's at a higher level of language acquisition and another student that's at a lower level of language acquisition. And after your direct instruction, when you've taught the students, and let's say you have half of them that kind of get it and half of them that don't, you're going to pair up the half that gets it with the half that doesn't. And then you're going to have them teach. Now, for this to be successful, you have to do a lot of explaining, modeling, and giving guidelines, right? You can't just say, here you go, teach it, right? The first few times to do this, you're going to sit down and you're going to model it with another student. You're going to show them what your expectations are. And not only that, you're going to give them guidelines. And when I say give guidelines, I mean you're going to have them up on your PowerPoint, you're going to have them written on maybe on a poster, you're going to have them laminated, whatever you want to do, but they're going to know exactly what is expected of them in order to do that thing. So, for example, you wouldn't just say to your listener, hey, pay attention, right? These are just some examples. You're going to say, look at the speaker. That seems so obvious to us that you're paying attention, you're looking at somebody, but it's not obvious to kids. Think about what they're saying, and you're going to model it. And then sometimes what I'll do is after we've done this activity, when I'm kind of training the kids how to do it, I'll have them rate their partner. I'll say, hey, Jorge, on a scale of 1 to 3, right? On a scale of, how did Maria do on listening? And he'll say, she's about a 2. I'll say, oh, really? Why do you say that? Well, she wasn't really looking at me when I was speaking. And I'll say, okay, Maria, that's what we need to work on. We got to remember to look at your partner when they're explaining things to you. And you just practice it. You go through, you rate them. They are going to get so good at this. But after they've practiced it a little bit, this works phenomenally well. Same thing with the speaker. You don't just say, hey, explain this. You're going to give them guidelines. You're going to have them posted up on the board. You're going to say things like, hey, make sure when you're explaining this that you speak in complete sentences. Because kids do this all the time, right? They just speak in like short, clipped phrases. We don't want to do that. We want to speak in a complete sentence and make sure you're using the academic vocabulary. All those big words that we've been using in class today, I want you to use that in your explanation, right? Make sure that, and again, I'll have the listener rank the speaker. I'll say, hey, Maria, how did Jorge do in his speaking? You say, well, I give him a 1. A 1? What happened, Maria? And he's like, he didn't speak in complete sentences. He was just kind of saying, all kinds of stuff, And so we'll say, Jorge, you got to work on that, buddy. We'll build it up together. Once they've practiced this a little bit and they've really got it down, this will do half your work for you. It really will. It just works so phenomenally well. I've had kids that couldn't explain to me. After my instruction, they're just like, I have no idea how to answer that question. But then after their partner, their friend explains it to them, they can answer it perfectly, which is kind of humbling as a teacher, but whatever works. So this is something I would use for engaging your lower level kids. And make sure you give goals, right? The goals will shift depending on what you're teaching. So for the speaker, it'll be, usually to explain whatever it is, whether it be the concept or the vocabulary word or what have you. For your listener, my favorite one is to retell to the teacher. Right? Tell it back to me. I'll say, I want you to say exactly what he told you, or exactly what she said about this. And then they'll tell it back, and then I'll say, how did they do? I'll ask their partner, how did they do on the retell? They'll say, oh, well, they left out a couple things. Oh, we got to work on that, right? But sometimes, they'll nail it. They'll get it perfect. And so it's again, another one of those things. It's simple, but it takes some practice. So many things they're good teaching techniques are simple things, but they just need practice and modeling before they really become really dynamic for you in your classroom. All right, I tell you what, everybody knows about visuals, and you've heard, I got to use visuals with ESL students. Visuals can be anything from pictures, diagrams, real objects, thinking maps like a Venn diagram. We probably know this, but here's my pro tip for you. Make sure you have a pattern to it. I'll see teachers that they've heard that I'm supposed to use visuals, and so they'll just kind of randomly throw one in every once in a while in their class, right? I guess that's better than nothing, but that's not the best use of visuals. In the same way that at the beginning of the year, you spend so much time on making sure your kids know the rules and the procedures and the routines. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? So it'll stick, right? You know, hey, if I can get these procedures down, these routines down, it's going to make it easier for them to stay on task, to follow along in class, etc., right? Okay, it's the same thing with your lesson. If I just randomly throw in visuals, that's not really effective. But if every time, for example, I'm going to teach a story, and before every story, I get out the key words, and I pre-teach those words. Okay? What that's going to tell your English language learner, even if they're pretty low level, they're going to go, oh, this is the part where the teacher is going to give me the words that I need to understand the story. They're going to pick up on that, and they're going to learn, oh, I need to really pay close attention to this part. It's going to help me all the way, because they want to understand the story, right? They don't want to be the only kid in class that doesn't get it. So just having a pattern can really help with things like that. I'm sorry, guys. I know we could have spent a lot more time. We're just out of time. Do you have any more questions? Anything? I feel like we just kind of barely scratched the surface, but hopefully if you want to stick around and talk afterwards, you have anything else you want to. But I just want to say thank you for what you do, because again, our kids, they need us, and I appreciate you being brave enough to take on the ESL instruction. Thank you.